All right, so you are live.
Leave that up there. Okay. Relax.
All set? All set?
Spot.
Yep.
You want me to?
Okay, council, we're going to call the meeting to order. Everybody can hear? Everybody can hear there? Good. Councilor Verbeek sends her regrets. She's on vacation. And I'm going to go right to Rob with the closed meeting report. Go ahead, Rob.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council earlier this evening met in closed session as permitted to do so by Section 239 2C. In closed session, council discussed a proposed disposition of town land and accordingly gave direction with respect to that piece of land. That's the extent of my report at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Is there any conflict of interest amongst council members here tonight? Seeing none, I need a motion for the adoption of the published agenda. Oh, pardon me. Hold on.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just have a few amendments or
Oh, yeah,
additions.
I'm sorry.
On
Go
the agenda.
ahead. Go ahead.
Number one, item 8.9 on the agenda, Schedule A to Bylaw 1924. That's part of Legal and Legislative Services Report 2020-10. That schedule or that page on the very first page of Schedule A has two footnotes. And for whatever reason, when we transposed over into the software, those two footnotes are missing. So the footnote number one under primary authority delegated to should say financial impacts should be consulted with the director and corporate services / treasurer. And then there's a second footnote under primary authority delegated to, and that note should read legal impacts should be consulted with the town solicitor and clerk, legal and legislative services. So just a few other, through you, Mr. Mayor, if I could, just a couple other amendments. Secondly, Councillor Bondi has asked for a matter to be added as new business this evening. I'll read the matter, and then it's up to you, Mr. Chair, as far as minor and urgent, as far as the test for new business. That the town of Essex requests the Windsor Essex County Health Unit to provide the breakdown of positive COVID-19 cases in our municipality and the region based on classification, travel, close contact, community contact, agri-farm, for example. This information is important and necessary to local decision makers and the general public to make decisions about programs and activities. Once again, proposed as in addition to new business under, I believe, item 14 on the agenda.
Okay, that'd be fine.
Okay. And then through you, Mr. Mayor, continuing, Deputy Mayor Meloche has provided a notice of motion that we propose to add as item 15.1.2. And I will present that at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Rob. So with the adoption of the published agenda with these amendments, I need a mover, please. Councillor Bowman and Councillor Bjorkman. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. And I need the adoption of the regular council meeting for July 6th, please. Deputy Mayor Meloche and Councillor Guerin. All in favor? It's carried. No public presentations, no unfinished business. And we'll go right to reports from administration, and we'll go right to Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Council. Nothing much new to report. I guess the only real news is, maybe not surprising news, is that we're not entering stage 3 as a region at this point. With respect to town business and town affairs, we are preparing for the opening of stage 3, which really for us is the arenas, I guess, on our end. So we're preparing on how we would fashion the arenas, what type of procedures we would need. There's many discussion going on with, the user groups, Ontario Minor Hockey, those types of things. So we're in the midst of doing that with, things have been going well at the office with our doors open here. No real issues that I've heard of. I think our maintenance of our fields and our our beautification, things are going well that way as well. So really, that's the extent of, I guess, my update with respect to where we're at with COVID. I think we're kind of in a holding pattern, even when we enter stage 3, I guess, minus the arena, which will bring a whole new light of issues that way. Things are progressing nicely here at the office and for the town that way.
Thank you, Chris. Go ahead.
Just received a report.
Yeah, I need a motion to receive the report, please.
Any questions or any? Yeah.
Any questions at all? Councillor Bondi, you had a question? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to our CAO and all our town staff, I've been hearing a lot of favorable feedback in the community with our pool and opening that up, and how we're doing it very strategically and safely, but having people getting out and getting physically active. People are really happy to be using it. And how we're operating our splash pads. We're getting lots of accolades, and people are calling you from other areas. How are you doing it? Because people want to get out. So I just want to thank our administrative staff for that. So one question specifically to Mr. Nepsy, do you foresee us, when are we meeting again in person? And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, through your worship, if I can proceed, is that okay? Can I answer that?
Go ahead.
Okay, good question. I know a few meetings ago we talked, I've been working to make it available for us to meet in person. So we've had some logistic issues in terms of how do we capture, because I think definitely the requirement is that we have to continue live streaming, right? Because we wouldn't have delegations necessarily in person at the beginning. So I'm working through it. The county is receptive to it. We're working through what parameters we would need to be able to go back to the county. We definitely have the room there to be socially separated in county council chambers. I think between council and staff, that wouldn't be an issue. Delegations would be zoomed in. It's just a matter of working through with our current CFTV on how that would take place, and if the audio would be up to snuff, and the transition of the operations of it. So working through those options, when I get to a point where I can comfortably say, yes, we can stream live and we can do it, and these are the issues we'd have, then I would come back to council, and you guys as a council can say to me what that looks like. Does it look like every council meeting? Does it look like just council meetings, but no special meetings? Are special meetings still electronic? Is it some hybrid of is it one meeting a month? I do see personally the benefit of meeting in person, through meetings at work. And I noted the other day when I got to see you at the Crawford packaging opening, or most councillors, it was nice to see everybody as a body. So on my end, I'm looking to at least present that option to council, and then we'll leave it up to council to determine how we want to head.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody else? So, Councillor Vandendolen, you had?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Nepsy, why can't we have delegations? It seems like overkill if we can be in the room and we can pass those people at the No Frills store in the same aisle, but they can't talk to us from 80 feet away in the council chambers. I think we should return to regular delegations, as long as they keep their distance.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, fair enough, Councillor Vanderdolen. I think we're also dealing with another office who's closed to the public right now. So it creates a different complexity when we're holding our council chambers there. They're letting us potentially, as extended employees of the county council chambers, enter. They're still not letting public in. So there's that layer. I will push to see if that becomes an option, whether we house them outside, somebody gets them to come in for, for council where they sit. We'll look at that option as well. I'll bring it back.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Go ahead. Sorry, I need Deputy Mayor Melange, you had something?
Yeah, I just want to add a couple comments. So right now, I've already talked with our CEO about this. I know that he's not talking about having this happen in August. He's looking more like when we go to stage 3 and perhaps in September. But I definitely would like to see this come back to council before we move forward on it, just to make sure that we're all comfortable with it. I, for one, am still leery about going back anytime soon. I don't want to be, and I talked to our CAO about this too. I definitely don't want to be the first ones back. Let's see how it looks with other councils, perhaps going back. And then, to me, this is working just fine. I understand the interaction, wanting to have the interaction and face to face, but really, you're still not face to face. You can't get in a group of 4 or 5 individuals talking together at close proximity. You're still 6 feet apart, at least 6 feet apart, let's hope. And as far as bringing in persons to talk, the difference with being in the store is that, first of all, I haven't been shopping on a regular basis, but when I do go in, there's lots of sanitizer, and I'm wearing a mask, and so is everybody else. I don't know, are we going to be wearing masks when we're sitting at these meetings? And I think that's the difference. We have to be setting an example, I believe, as being public figures. And one of the ways that we can do it is to continue on with virtual meetings until such time that we feel it's very safe. And all of us should be using masks when we're meeting together, and until we're actually sitting down in place, perhaps, and then we take our masks off. But there has to be some pretty good controls, as far as I'm concerned, to show an example.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I need a motion to receive the report. Need a motion? Councillor Bowman and Councillor Guerin. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you.
(8.2) on the agenda this evening is Economic Development 2020-09, Community Improvement Plan Update, second quarter 2020. That said report be received for council information purposes.
Need a mover, please? Receive it. Mover to receive the report, Councillor Bondi and Councillor Bjorkman. Any questions? Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do want to thank staff for digging out some answers to some questions that I had today about in 2016. I couldn't remember if it was 2016, 2017, when CIP uptake in Harrow was not as great as it was in Essex Center, and we had to shuffle some funds. So now I see kind of the reverse. I see Colchester businesses and Harrow businesses really having a high uptake. So I'm glad that staff members are open-minded, and hopefully council will be open-minded if we have to shift some money to another CIP pocket. It's a great program, and I hope our businesses continue to uptake it. Thank you.
Anybody else from council? Councillor Van Endolen, you're next.
Yes, Your Worship, through you, I just want to observe to the public that our numbers, our construction numbers, have virtually doubled since last year. This is a great sign. Part of it's just due to the luck of the draw and things finally breaking our way, but part of it's due to this new council and the way we conduct business and the way our administration has pursued new development. And we've got $40 million worth of new stuff, and last year at this time we only had 20, and that's terrific, despite the whole flu thing. It's great.
Thank you. Councillor Guerin, you were next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the CIP grants, I see there's lots of pending ones right now that we're waiting for completion to finalize. I'm just wondering, do we have an approximate idea of those projects that are current right now, how much that's going to be, and how do we determine with all these applications out if we're going to meet the budget that's allowed or not? I'm just wondering how that all works.
And who can answer that one? Lori, can you answer this? Go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Guerin. Well, at this time, we have a lot of work that is underway in both Essex Center and in the Harrow, Colchester South, and Canada Road 50 CIPs. Is there a way to figure out at this time how much we will be dispersing. Unfortunately not, but because the work is ongoing. So some exterior work, facade work, or outdoor cafe work, even consulting services. And so there is really no way at this time, but we are in a position, as our CIO indicated this morning, we're monitoring the programs, and prior to turning any application down, we will come forward to council to provide options on whether that looks like pulling from one CIP, borrowing from one CIP and moving to another. The last thing we want to do is turn anyone down. We are seeing a wonderful uptake and intake in Colchester and Harrow, and this is a great news story. So that great news story is if we at that point where we need additional funding, we are on the same page as all of you, and we will come forward with some options for council's decision making.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All in favor of the report? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 8.3 on the agenda this evening is Economic Development 2020-10. Building Report and Development Overview for the month of June 2020 for receipt this evening.
Can I get a mover to receive it, please? Councillor Bowman and Councillor Bjorkman. Any questions? All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
8.4 on the agenda this evening is Planning 2020-15, Climate Change Adaptation Plan, Progress Report number 2 for receipt this evening. And I believe, Mr. Mayor, Ms. Chadwick
Yes.
is looking to speak to this matter.
Yes. Go ahead, Laurie, if you want to speak on it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, again, and good evening once again to council. So the purpose of the report is to provide you with an update on the status of the Climate Change Adaptation Plan and to give you that overlook of all of the great work that our climate change analyst, Naharika Bandrew, has been embarking on with the external and the internal climate adaptation teams. So you'll see in the report that we have several appendices where you're able to flip through some of the presentations, some of the associated documents, as well as some of the direct feedback that we've received from both internal and external teams. We've also been able to almost wrap up phase 1. So we're in towards the end of phase 1, where what that means is that we've assessed climate impacts, we've analyzed our vulnerabilities, and we're currently identifying what our priority risks are. So what that means is moving into phase 2, you'll start to see the CCAP, that adaptation plan, start to take shape. And administration will continue to work with the ECAT and the ICAT, as well as members of the public and other external stakeholders, such as ELK. We've received great feedback from ELK. We've also reached out to our local First Nations, the Caldwell First Nations, as well, for some feedback as well. Most notably, I'd like to share with you that in the fall, we will be coming to council with an information session. And this information session will be able to give you a bit more versus a report on your agenda versus this 5-minute briefing from me. It'll give you a more face-to-face viewpoint of what we as the town of Essex are facing in terms of vulnerabilities and some of those adaptation measures that we propose that could be implemented down the road. So for now, we hope that you accept this report as is, and we look forward to providing you with that one-on-one information session in the fall.
Thank you, Laurie. Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Laurie, just a question of, this is the committee that I've never seen so many members of the public have interest in. The names that we're interested in, have they been invited to watch a Zoom meeting of the meeting? I've watched 2 myself now, and I know Zoom does come with challenges, but one of the great benefits of living in Zoom world is you can watch some of our meetings, and I've done it to several of our committee meetings, and then you can actually follow along and see. This committee is a very hardworking committee. It's probably the longest committee meetings I've ever seen. So that it's really nice and interesting to watch. So all of the people that were interested in it, I just want to see if they've had the opportunity to watch.
Thank you. Anybody else? Go ahead.
If there was a question, which I believe there was, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Councillor Bondi. Yes, there are opportunities for sure through public notice of the meetings where individuals are able to respond back with their intentions to watch those Zoom meetings, and we do provide them with that information. Not only that, we do also have through our website a web form where members of the public are able to provide their direct input on certain matters such as vulnerability and climate impact. So moving forward, we will always be tweaking these web forms with the latest and greatest questions so that if someone were to watch a Zoom meeting afterwards, we do have those recorded, then we can certainly obtain feedback from members of the public that are not on ECAT through web form, through direct email, and etc.
Thank you, Laurie. Anybody else? Council? Okay, I need a motion to receive that report, please. Need a motion? Councillor Bjorkman and Deputy Mayor Malash. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you.
8.5 on this evening's agenda is Parks and Facilities Report 2020-06. Results of request for tender for the roof replacement of Harrow Arena, Section C and Section E. For receipt, and that council awards the request for tender to Gillette Roofing, Inc. in the amount of $171,923.52.
Mover, please, on this one. Councillor Bowman and Councillor Bjorkman. Any questions? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Malash.
Yes, I'm not sure. I know Mr. Morrison's not here tonight, but Mr. Sweet maybe can answer this. I noticed that the lowest bidder wasn't the one that was chosen. Did we have a request for proposal rather than quote on this that made Gillette a better qualifier?
You, Mr. Mayor, as in the report, the lowest bidder actually didn't meet the qualifications of the specs. So then they went second lowest bidder.
Okay, thanks. I didn't notice that in the report, but I must have just missed it. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Anybody else? All in favor? It's carried. Thank you.
8.6 this evening is Legal and Legislative Services 2020-02. Columbarium at Colchester Memorial Cemetery for receipt, and that council approves the transfer of any proceeds received after the initial unit is fully funded to reserve, and that once sufficient funding is obtained, that the accumulated reserve amounts be subsequently used for the installation of future units, and that council approves the initial per unit pricing, including the interment rate.
Mover on this report, please. Councillor Bowman and Deputy Mayor Malash. Any questions on this one? Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. More of a comment to our Deputy Clerk, Ms. Shelley Brown. Fantastic work, and I think this is going to be a great addition to our cemetery in Colchester. It's an extremely affordable option that many people are looking forward to, and I think they will really look great. So I think it's a great step for our cemetery. Thank you.
Anybody else? Deputy Mayor Malash, go ahead.
Yes, through you, Your Worship. I just wanted to say the same thing. Basically, I think this is a fantastic idea, and I applaud our whoever came up with the idea, and I believe it was our administration. So thanks for thinking of the residents and bringing this forward, because this is a much better, more affordable option than what we've been afforded in the past. So thanks again.
Thank you, Councillor Vandendel. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's a great idea. The columbarium is terrific, but I'm a little bit concerned about the pricing structure. Currently, we're charging people $1,600 for a full traditional plot, but we're going to charge them 50% more for one of these niches. Now, either we're not charging enough for the traditional plots, or we're charging too much for the niches, but charging them more for 1/30th of the land that they would have used with it doesn't seem right. It seems out of whack to me. And since pricing has a terrific effect on how people respond, I think you might see some resistance to people paying more for the niche, even though it would serve our purposes and be better all around. But I question that pricing. Doesn't mean I'm going to oppose this, but perhaps in the future we might have to revisit the pricing structure. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll have Shelley respond to that. Councillor, go ahead, Shelley.
Yep, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Vanderdolen. So the pricing is inclusive of the, what would be called a headstone. So it does not include the inscription, but you do not need a headstone. So it does come with the granite front on that, which typically runs between, a decent one would be at minimum $1,500. So when you look at the overall pricing of a columbarium unit for the 2 urns, it is substantially cheaper, as well as the interment or interment fee is, again, substantially cheaper for the columbarium unit. So although the initial price may be more, all of your incidental prices that go with it are substantially cheaper. And there's no requirement for a vault as well.
Okay, anybody else from council? So I need a motion for the report, please.
We do have a motion.
We have a motion, okay.
Councillor Bowman and
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor Malash.
Yeah, all in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you.
Eight point seven on this evening's agenda is Legal and Legislative Services 2020-08, quarter revision for the Crystal Beach Drain. And this is together with bylaw 1920 for provisional or two readings this evening. That said report be received, that the following 3 members of the Drainage Board, Mr. Carter, Mr. Boudreau, and Mr. Dufour, be appointed to sit as members of the quarter revision, scheduled to convene for 5 o'clock on August 12th via electronic meeting, and that bylaw 1920 accordingly be read a first and a second time and be provisionally adopted this July 20th.
Thank you. I need a motion for that report, please. Councillor Bjorkman and Councillor Bowman. Any questions on this one? All in favor of the report? It's carried. Thank you.
8.8 this evening is Legal and Legislative Services 2020-09, procedural bylaw amendments and consolidation. And this is with bylaw 1926, new bylaw 1926, to provide for the rules of procedure for the conduct of meetings of municipal council and its committees and boards for receipt. And that said bylaw received only 2 readings this evening. And that bylaw 1681 be repealed upon final passage of 1926.
Thank you. I need a mover on this report, please.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, I can provide a quick summary if that's council's wish.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Malash and seconder, please. Councillor Bowman. All in favor? Scary. Any questions on this one? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Malash.
I was going to ask if Mr. Auger wanted to give us a briefing on it.
Yep, sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you through Mr. Mayor to you, Deputy Mayor. Just a quick summary. These were basically, this is a consolidation that's been not a long time coming, but one that we've needed to do as a result of some amendments that have been that have taken place over the last year or so. We passed amending bylaw 1784, which provided for some greater flexibility as far as delegation rules, especially the opportunity for residents to become delegates after the publication of the agenda. Then we passed an amending bylaw 1788, which basically just incorporated the conflict of interest registry requirements that came out through the Act. And then most recently, we passed amending bylaw 1902, which provided council with the opportunity both during the time of a declared emergency and we have provision for when we're not in a declared emergency, providing the ability for council to meet electronically. So we basically consolidated those 3 changes. Then there were some additional minor changes requested by council by resolution, not by formal amending bylaw. and those related to the national anthem at our meeting, so we added that. We revised the youth council member provisions so that there's a little bit of flexibility. The bylaw currently states that it has to be a youth council member from one of wards 1 and 2 and one of wards 3 and 4. So we tweaked the wording just to provide for a little flexibility should that be council's wish. And then we revised the rules to clarify the fact that there should be no meetings on Remembrance Day. And then we made a couple of additions together with some housekeeping changes. We added a formal section 3.6, just formalizing the ability for council to meet as committee of the whole. The ability for council to do that has always been there, but it's never really been articulated in the procedural bylaw, at least the current versions that we have. So we added some language providing the ability for council and explaining some of the rules surrounding the ability to meet in the committee of the whole format. And then lastly, just some housekeeping matters of note. We formalized the ability when we have correspondence on the agenda for receipt. Any council member can simply request that item be moved into for support and receipt should they wish to discuss that particular item. So they have the ability to pull those items out of what would otherwise be a consent motion. And then on notices of motion, we have amended to ask that these notices of motion be presented in writing at the top of the meeting or at the start of the meeting, just to help us formalize and be able to articulate both for public and for administration the direction being sought from that notice of motion. And that's consistent with other notices of motion from other municipalities. We looked at a number of other, including some of the other local municipalities. And in those cases, the notice of motion actually are required to be submitted in writing a lot sooner or a lot further back than at the start of the meeting. So that was about it. That's a quick summary of some of those changes that finally we've been able to catch up and implement.
Thank you, Rob, for that report. Councillor Bjorklund, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Rob, for that report. I just want to touch on one thing you brought up there already, is that committee of the whole. It's a great tool for us to use. We oftentimes say, I wish we had an opportunity to just discuss something. We don't really need to come up with a recommendation. We don't need to come up with a motion, but we don't have a tool to create that conversation dialogue at the council table. And I think for all of us, that's something that we'll really be able to, the relaxed rules, you don't have to have a motion, we can have a discussion. So thanks for putting that in there and bringing that back to light, that's a tool we can use. I think we'll get a lot of use from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Guerin.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. A couple things I'd like to request, if I could, it's quite many pages here. If I can get a printed copy of that, it'd be greatly appreciated. On 4.8, reports and announcements from council members, is any of the language in those two, 4.81 and 4.82, is that language new or is it the exact same?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and to Councillor Guerin. So a couple of things. Certainly, once this bylaw passes, we'll send new copies to all of council. With respect to 4.8, the only wording that was changed or added, everything substantially has stayed the same, but we added wording clarifying that whatever that report is, whatever that announcement is from the council member, it's supposed to be a non-controversial matter that doesn't spurn further discussion or debate from council. It's just supposed to be strictly from a reporting perspective. I found wording to that effect in the City of Windsor's procedural bylaw, and I thought it was relevant.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor.
Okay. Just further that, under voting, and this is no shot at our mayor by no means, I'm just want clarification on the voting. When there's a call for a vote, does the mayor have to vote, or does he have to declare if he does not want to vote? How does the vote from the chair's position work?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, that's the mayor's option. Traditionally, the mayor has voted and he has every right to vote. But it's really, his option, much as it is the option of the council members.
Okay, so I guess the question I have is, if a council member chooses not to vote, doesn't raise their hand on the call of the question, it's recorded as a negative.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. And through you, Mr. Mayor, the same rule would apply to the head of council as well.
Okay, so if there's a call for a question and the mayor doesn't raise his hand, it's to be recorded as a negative.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Van Dolen, you had a question.
Sorry, that took a minute. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Roger, for, through you, your worship, thank you, Mr. Roger, for the great report and the good work and some good housekeeping, and we've cleaned up a lot of loose ends. One thing, though, that concerns me is that I think we're still being too restrictive on the ability of delegations to appear before us and address their fellow citizens. On the weekend, I had occasion to hear from some people who wanted to speak to the meeting last week and tried to get on Monday and found out it was too late. The trouble with the system we have right now is that sort of the protesters and activists and organized groups, they're all plugged in. They know when something's coming to council, and of course administration does. But average bystanders or somebody who lives 12 houses down the road and doesn't talk to the person right next to the issue, they don't hear about it until it's too late for them to become a delegation. And I think it's too restrictive. I don't know how we're going to fix it in the future, but I mean, obviously administration knows when reports are coming sooner than the Thursday before the meeting, but I don't think it's reasonable to expect average people to know within 24 hours that something of interest to them is at Essex Town Council, and allowing them sort of by our grace to squeeze in by Monday doesn't seem like enough to me. And I think we're going to have to improve this in the future somehow. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll have Rob respond to that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Van Dolen. Duly noted. I mean, we did amend the procedural bylaw a little while back. Originally, the deadline for any delegations was basically 2 o'clock on the Tuesday of the agenda review. We extended that because of a request that came from council to basically allow at least some time after the published agenda comes out on the Thursday for, the relevant residents who have an item on that agenda that they're concerned about. They can put in a request to be a delegate, but that's even limited, I believe, to the Friday. So that might be something to look at. Ironically, during this time of COVID and during the time that we're in the declared emergency, we've relaxed that even further. We've been posting on our public calendars that people can request to be a delegate basically up to 24 hours before the scheduled start time of the meeting. So, maybe that's something to give consideration to.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you. Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would also like more flexibility with delegations. I believe other municipalities, I think Lakeshore is one, they allow it right up until the Monday. And what we really had before wasn't working at all, right? The agenda deadline was Tuesday and the deadline to get on was also Tuesday. One tool that we have is that the delegation can approach the clerk and the mayor, and we, I think through 2/3 vote, can vote to get a delegation on, which sometimes becomes political though, right? So I think we should take the politics out of it and open it up to allow people to speak to us. A couple other things that stuck out with me with the report is 2.8.4, where council members are encouraged to contact the appropriate director or the CAO in a timely manner prior to a meeting. So this agenda isn't too bad, but some of our agendas lately have been 300, 400 pages. Some of us work, some of us have children. I don't know if there's a solution to that, but sometimes, sending out the big hefty reports, perhaps if they're ready, then it could allow us to look through them a little bit more thoroughly. Like we get them Thursday at 4. That gives us a Friday. Some of us do want to spend some family time on the weekends. Some of us work on the weekends. So I'm really struggling to get through everything thoroughly. And I like to read my agenda 2-3 times. So that's really been a challenge. Even though I'm home right now with COVID, I have 2 ankle biters that are 2 and 4. Another thing that I am really uncomfortable with, but we don't have to change it necessarily. I think even the new term of council can change it, but is 5.1.2 in regards to the striking committee. The new striking committee for the new council will be the mayor, the deputy mayor, and only 1 councillor. So you basically should just have the mayor and the deputy mayor because you need 2 votes. So I liked the 4-person striking committee this term. I don't really necessarily like the 3, and I don't like deciding on what the new council might want to do. The new council, like I've been talking around to other councillors in the region, and they decide who goes on the committees in terms of members from the public. But then the mayor decides which councillors go on the committees through meeting with the councillors and figuring that out. So there's a whole bunch of different models out there, and I don't think it's really fair for us to set up the new term of council and tell them, you're going to have 3 people on your striking committee. That's one thing that I didn't really like. And also another thing is another town that I've been watching, the town of Lakeshore, they have recorded votes for every vote. I absolutely love it because right now people see us in Zoom, so they see our hands. But when we're sitting in council chambers, you don't really see how people vote all the time. So I don't know if there's a way we could do recorded votes more often, but it's something that I think we should really look into. It's like a roll call vote. It's not necessarily a recorded vote, but I would love to see us go through that. Thank you.
Anybody else from council? Okay, do we have a mover in there?
It was moved by Deputy Mayor Melange.
Yeah.
Seconded by Councilor.
All in favor of the report? Carried. Thank you.
.9 on this evening's agenda is Legal and Legislative Services 2020-10, redelegation of authority bylaw amendments. And this is together with bylaw 1924, being a bylaw to delegate the duties and powers of the council of the town of Essex for 3 readings this evening. And that bylaws 869, 1404, and 1737 be repealed upon final passage of 1924.
Thank you, Rob. Need a mover on this report, please. Councillor Guerin, Councillor Bjorkman, any questions on this one? All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
.10, Mr. Mayor, on this evening's agenda is Legal and Legislative Services Report 2020-11, re-election review of policies and procedures. Said report is on the agenda for council and public information purposes. And through you, Mr. Mayor, to council, I can again provide just an overview, a quick overview of the report.
Thank you, Rob. I guess we'll allow Rob to go ahead with the review. Go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, just a quick overview. So conducting a review of election policies, procedures, bylaws is part of the standard work that should be done between elections. We do have additionally a council resolution that was passed back in September asking for that review, but certainly the review itself would be part and parcel anyways of the preparation, in regards to the next election. So additionally, like any other processes over time, it's good practice. It's part of best practices to, review those processes and, due to changing times, there may be a need to, improve the delivery of those services. whatever those areas are. And, and I know we're talking specific to elections. So, it's good to look at improving those delivery services, ensuring best practices with current legislation. And, and the goal, I guess, isn't necessarily, to discuss specifics from the 2018 election itself, but certainly the report does touch upon several areas that we recognized needed improvement as far as processes. But really, what this report is doing, at least for council this evening, is providing a framework for moving forward. What are going to be those next steps as we move forward at trying to implement some of these improvements that came from that review. So that's a large part of what the report touches upon. The report references the fact that the Municipal Elections Act, yes, does give responsibility for conducting the elections to the clerk. There's some discretionary powers given to the clerk to provide for any matter that may be necessary for conducting that election. So this review kind of took place against that backdrop, within the context of those powers, and the goal being to try to maintain that independence of the process, and continue to ensure integrity of the process and confidence in the process, which is obviously a big part. So I focused on, I kind of did a number of exercises. One was reviewing all of the correspondence from the 2018 election, the feedback that we did receive, whether they were from residents or candidates. We reviewed the policies and bylaws themselves. We did a lot of work comparing them to other municipalities, both municipalities that were larger in size, municipalities that were somewhat similar, but as council knows, it's definitely hard to compare apples to apples when it comes to municipalities. But we focused on a few key areas that the report outlines. The first being the use of corporate resources policy. And in a nutshell, this policy, what it does is it prohibits a candidate or other persons from making or receiving any use of town property or resources for campaign purposes. That's basically what it is in an overly simplified way of putting that. So the goal of this new policy is to come with a more enhanced policy, one that's clear, because as the report references, the current policy, besides being 10 years old, was short on specifics, to be honest. And so it needs that enhancement. So the goal of this new policy is to basically better clarify the do's and don'ts for candidates, so that hopefully they have that clarity at the outset. And my report mentioned it, but we had lots of instances where candidates were asking, if this was acceptable, if this was permissible. And so that when you have those inquiries, that surely does point to the fact that more specifics and more clarity is needed. So with the use of corporate resources policy, that's basically what we're looking at doing here. The report, and I won't go through it in a great amount of detail, but the report kind of tells you some of these changes that we're proposing. The key one, of course, is going to be a wider and more expansive definition of what is town property, what are town facilities, and it's basically, it needs to extend to anywhere the town conducts business, whether the town owns that property, whether the town leases that property, but it needs a wider application, I feel, coming out of the 2018 election. More detail and information on restrictions on the use of the town's corporate identity. There was some confusion coming out of the election on the use of town logos, gateway signs, that sort of thing. So the new policy will attempt to provide clarity as to those restrictions. And so there's a few other items that are mentioned here: enhanced protocols and restrictions with respect to town cell phones. They're obviously already restricted, but we're looking at some further enhancements with respect to that. Information protocols. So as clerk and returning officer for the election, as we received questions from candidates, we made our best efforts to share that information with the candidates so that candidates had that same information, those same responses. But what we need to do, and a recommendation coming out of the 18 election, is to make sure that these questions, these answers are also available on the town website, so that the public is better alerted and better aware of maybe some of the issues that are out there amongst the candidates. And then the rest of the recommendations, they still relate to information protocols. So information protocols as far as when candidates request information from the town. We'll have protocols in place that will, restrict who they can ask that information from, and town staff will be instructed accordingly. So it's a lot of those types changes that we're looking to do to try to enhance and just bring more clarity. The next one that I wanted to touch upon briefly is the recommendation of a standalone election sign bylaw. So our current election sign provisions are contained within our current general sign bylaw. And really upon review, the provisions that are in there really are not sufficient to address what I would say are the changing realities of a modern election campaign. The traditional lawn sign is not the only means of visually displaying support for a candidate or for a cause. As we all know, there's a variety of other mediums, whether those are card decals, magnets, billboards, and there's other forms. So, part of this is to clarify that. And certainly in a standalone bylaw, we're hoping that it will clarify those things. And hopefully by pulling it out of an otherwise big comprehensive general bylaw and placing it into a standalone bylaw, we're hoping the communication to the candidates and to the public alike will be easier, and it'll be easier to read, and most importantly, easier to understand. Secondly, what came out of the election sign review was we need to improve enforcement and proactive enforcement if possible. So that's why one of the recommendations in this report is the recommendation for the use of an election sign permit process with fees that go with that process. And this will hopefully at least provide more tools in that enforcement toolbox to deal with election sign violations. Because a lot in all the cases, the violation has already occurred, but that deterrence factor is missing. And then thirdly, and I say it in the report, the number one complaint about election signs was clearly proactive enforcement. And I detail in the report the challenges we would have from a resources point of view. We simply don't have the resources for 45 days to patrol the streets looking for election sign violations. So it's very much complaint driven. And we try to deal with them on one-off basis. But certainly if it's this council's wish, to provide for more proactive enforcement, then, that's something we can consider. There would most likely be the requirement for additional budget funds, whether that's on the bylaw enforcement side or on the election side. I notion the ideal of bringing in some of our election staff much earlier in the process to assist with this. But certainly if the wish is for proactive enforcement, and again, that was probably the number one complaint on that side of it, then we would need to look at that potentially. The next one that I recommend is the election complaint policy. So the purpose of this policy is essentially to provide a directional map, you know, for anyone who has a complaint about any aspect of the election, whether it's, you know, a concern with an election worker, a concern with the clerk, our processes, or the conduct of a candidate. This will hopefully clarify how to file a complaint, where to file that complaint, and who has the responsibility for dealing with that complaint. As I mentioned in the report, it was not always clear to the public, and perhaps for the candidates, for that matter, as far as how to file a complaint and who has jurisdiction to resolve that complaint. Often the assumption was often made that it was the clerk's office that had the jurisdiction to resolve that complaint, but that wasn't always the case. And so the hope is that, you know, a transparent election complaint policy will at least, you know, act as that roadmap, that directional roadmap as far as what the options are for a member of a public that or candidates that have a complaint. The next section, I talked briefly about emergency or pandemic measures. That section more or less speaks for itself. The clerk has emergency powers provided under the Municipal Elections Act to take such measures, you know, to ensure the integrity of the election. But what's lacking in some are some details. You know, I don't think you know, we haven't been confronted with a pandemic situation. I don't know if we'll be still facing a pandemic situation when that time comes. But it's good to look at that. And so those would be some amendments to our municipal election procedures policy. Lastly, I mentioned the last section concerns proxy voting. And again, it's not advisable to comment on specific matters from the 2018 election, but I can say the following few points. As far as the proxy forms and the process, as far as the information required to be filled out and the certification of those forms, we, as far, you know, from speaking from the aspect of the town of Essex, we really don't have a lot of control over that. Those are forms mandated by the Minister of Municipal Affairs and by the Municipal Elections Act, Section 44. Secondly, while the proxy voting process, you know, set out by the town to date has followed Ministry of Municipal Affairs instructions and has followed the procedures at least set out in Section 44 of the Act, the fact still remains that we did receive a number of complaints during the past election. And so this required us to review matters further. And regardless, you know, whether or not the complaints received are founded or unfounded, the very fact that the complaints were received, I feel has led us to the conclusion that we need to try to look at ways to put increased controls in place, you know, increased controls over and above what the Ministry of Municipal Affairs requires. And those are the procedures that, you know, we've observed to date, but maybe we need to look at increased controls. So again, any controls put into place though, would still be dependent upon support from the provincial level, as you know, my report makes 3 or 4 recommendations in that last section. And it really is still contingent upon receiving provincial support. And like I said, I identified some measures, but to try to impose those greater controls and that improvement, but certainly that is the key to this is receiving some direction, I believe, from the ministry. As far as next steps, you know, as stated at the outset, this report once again is a framework for going forward and a roadmap for when our revised or new bylaws, policies, and procedures will come to council. So there really isn't any further action on the part of council at this point. Tonight is for, you know, feedback from council. It's for information purposes for the public and for council. But as far as next steps, and these would be tentative dates, but these are the dates we're looking to bring back some of these revised policies or bylaws. The election complaints policy is slated to come back to council for adoption in September. Hopefully in September, but maybe in early October is the new use of corporate resources policy. October, November would be the time frame as far as the standalone election sign bylaw with the permit provisions that I referenced in the report. And then closer to December, we're looking at revising. We already have general municipal election procedures policy, but we're looking to enhance that as part of a general review. Adds a little bit more guidelines to help us manage during a time of emergency. And then it would probably be in that policy that we would look to potentially implement additional proxy vote procedures. So that's a basic summary of the report. If council has some questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Rob. Any questions from council? Councillor Guerin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sure, I'll start things off, I guess. There's a lot of good stuff in the report, Rob. Thank you very much. I know you've been working on it. I could see the time you put into it. Like I say, it's a good start. We needed to do what you're doing here, but I think we're trying our best to tighten things up, make candidates more accountable, in hopes that future elections may be fair for everyone. But as noted on page 4 and page 243 of the agenda, no one policy, no matter how comprehensive, will be able to capture and interpret all potential scenarios. And that's really our issue we're dealing with. You make all the changes we want, but if we can't enforce it and there's no penalties behind it, then it's all for naught. So if you take, for example, the brochure scenario, what's a proper and fair penalty? If I put the town logo on my brochure, send it out to 5,000 homes, the damage is already done. What penalties would be enforced on me for that action? And I don't think we have an answer for that. And your signs, implementing a $300 or $500 retainer, it sounds really good. But to me, I think a lot of people will eat those dollars just to get the votes. They'll put the signs up and put them in illegal places. And then how does enforcement even prove that I put it there? Maybe I put it on a resident's property. He told me to put it there. He cut the grass, moved it to a property it wasn't supposed to be on. So even if you see the sign on someone else's property or an illegal property, how do you prove that the candidate put it there? Actually, if we're talking about the signs themselves, I mean, a simple way of dealing with that is just to get rid of them all. It wouldn't bother me one bit. I mean, how effective are they anyways? They don't really translate into any votes. They get you some awareness out there, but there's a lot far greater ways to get your name out there and appeal to the voters than just a sign. Rob maybe mentioned a few: social media, you have direct mail. I did quite a bit of direct mail, billboards you can do, newsprint. So like I say, there's other means besides the signs. Signs, as far as I'm concerned, are not near as effective as just going to the doors and knocking on them. So I know that, I mean, we have signs that we made last time, and we have lots of them in storage, but it's a little unfair, I think, for the incumbent for the candidate coming in. I mean, he's got to go out or she's got to go out and get all kinds of money into a budget to get signs to try to compete with us. So, I mean, I'm okay with even getting rid of the signs. The proxies, getting them from the town hall, I think is a great step. I'm not sure, Rob, if your intent there is the person would have to set up a meeting, go to you, get a form. That form has a stamp of our town seal on it and it's dated, but it was something along those lines, and that helps with any potential proxy issues, and I think that's a great step. But I applaud you. It's a lot of work, an uphill battle. I can hear your frustration when you're talking, actually, that it's tough to really nail down something firm when there's so many variables in play here. So I'll leave it at that. I'll wait to hear what everyone else has to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Van den Dolen, you were next.
Thank you, Mayor Snively. Through you, well, you know, if my friend Councillor Guerin doesn't want to use signs next time, that's fine for him. But somebody tried that last time, and his face isn't here tonight. So you go ahead, but I don't think you could prevent the rest of us from using signs. I find like it's a lot of good little loose ends are tied up here and kind of carved in stone so that people can't claim they didn't know what the rule was. But this, from what I've seen, none of the rules will really change under what is coming towards us in the next five little tranches, except for handing the proxy votes directly to the person who wants to use them. And that's a good little tweak. Doesn't change a heck of a lot, but fine. But I do find it strange, Mr. Auger, that you say that if there are complaints about something, it doesn't matter whether the complaints are founded or unfounded. Even if they're untrue, you have to do something. Well, that sounds like the most absurd legal interpretation I've ever heard. I don't see that that's supportable anyway. If a complaint is unfounded, then it should be dismissed out of hand. But that being said, I don't see anything to oppose in these minor tweaks. You know, the whole sign thing. I was being interviewed by somebody in the media this afternoon about this. In 40 years of being a reporter, I don't think there was one election, and I bet I covered 50 elections. There wasn't one election where somebody didn't complain about signs. It's human nature. It's part of what goes along with the contest and the headbutting and people trying to gain advantage over each other. You're never going to stop that. And you could post these sign rules on every corner in the town, and someone's still going to try and break them, and someone's going to complain. So let's just police it. Policing it better would be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Bondi, you were smiling ear to ear to ear to ear. You can't wait to get to the media. So you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe that that comment was uncalled for. As you heard, Councillor Vanderdoel and the media called him. The media also called me. Let's not get into an argument about that. Anyways, to our clerk's department, thank you, Mr. Auger. A very thorough starting point. I did provide some comments already. I think that one of the things that I really like going to the polling stations. So I really hope that council likes to go to the polling stations. You know, there are benefits with mail and in electronic voting, but I think that it's most secure going to the polling stations. I also believe that the more opportunities we give people to vote, the better. So I would love to see in the next election an advanced poll in McGregor and an advanced poll in Colchester. I believe 4 advanced polls at a minimum would be really good. I would be in favor of hiring extra staff if we have to police signs. This last election was pretty ugly because a lot of us didn't know what to do. And I drove around with a magnetic sign on my car because it really wasn't defined, right? Like I put a picture up on my social media of a sign because it really wasn't defined. So this is going to define a lot of things, and it's going to, I think it'll be easier on our clerk in the next election, right? It's about having our staff in good situations where they're not pulling their hair out. In terms of the proxy votes, municipalities move slow, but I believe the province even moves more slow. So I would love to send a letter off or a form off to the province sooner rather than later saying, hey, the town of Essex has reviewed proxy voting and we think that this is a good suggestion. So that's one thing. You know, the town of Essex requests the Ministry of Municipal Affairs to make proxy voting forms only available at the clerk's office. I think that could potentially help out a lot of people. So overall, really good. I look forward to seeing it roll out and looking at it, piece by piece. The sign bylaw, I agree with Councillor Guerin. You know, like if I was running for mayor, what's $500? What's $500 if I place my signs illegally? I also think that if administration has to confiscate your sign, you don't get it back, because that's a penalty in and of itself. Some of my signs in the last election were close to $30, my big ones. So if I know I'm putting it somewhere and I'm not going to get it back, I may be reluctant to do that. I also think if we have offenders, we should have a place on our website, election offenders, and that might stop people. One of the things that we noticed from the last election is that, yes, we should have a formal complaint policy, but if the OPP have to be notified about something, it can take them a year and a half to do an investigation. So I don't know if there's something else that we can have, if the OPP have to come in or somebody else has to come in, because by the time the OPP do an investigation, the election's over. So maybe by doing all this work and fixing all these bylaws, we won't need to ever get there, but great work, Clerk's Department. Thank you.
Councillor Bjorkman, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Ogier. A very good report. A lot of detail, and I think that's what we need. We need processes, we need procedures, we need rules to follow, and then there needs to be repercussions if we don't follow the rules. I think for the most part, I'm not worried that we need a $5,000 fine. I think what we're looking at as far as doing a deposit and you having to pay restitution through that deposit, if it ends up being greater than that, then you'll have a bill at the end of the election season. But having that standalone sign bylaw is not only just good for our municipal election, I like that it's going to be tied to the provincial election and tied to the federal election, because that's one of the ways that some of our candidates get confused is it's not always the same. What happens in the provincial, like, well, I saw where they had their signs, I saw what they had. This way, it's the same for everybody. It's very consistent. I think it'll be easier for people to follow. One of the things that I think is interesting is that, okay, we don't want anybody, that has an advantage, that's already a member of council using corporate logos, this or that. But to say you can't use the gateway sign, and maybe if somebody wants to stand up front of that sign and says, I want to be the next mayor of this town, and they're standing in front of the gateway sign. It's a public sign, it's a public place. I don't see any reason for us not to be able to use, maybe you got a new candidate that comes in, stands in front of town hall and says, I want to flip this town upside down. I'm going to take over town hall. We're going to change everything here. I don't think there's a problem using the town areas that are open to everybody. I think it's important. There's going to be a lot of video in the next election. We know this is how things are moving. People aren't just going to be taking pictures and putting up signs. They'll be all over the internet, making videos, Instagram posts, all those kinds of things. And it will be very, very effective to be able to use those things. So I think we need to be careful to say, you can't ever have anything that's branded the town of Essex in any advertising. I don't think that's realistic, and I don't think it's going to be very interesting to see how people will use the public corporate logo. Anyways, other than that, I'm happy with what I've read in this report. I believe it's going to streamline the process and really give us a process and a procedure to follow to help people do the right thing. I believe most of the people who run for this job run for it for the right reason. They follow the rules as best they can, and sometimes they make a mistake. Let's not all jump on people for some of those things. Other times, yeah, there are things that are done egregiously that need to be taken care of. So all in all, it's a very good report. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman. You're next.
Thank you, Your Honor. It's a great piece of work by all the people this evening on their reports. This one especially because it does sort of, as mentioned before, it tightens up many of the things. The comment I would have, election signs have been an issue for the last 35, 40 years. Some like them, some don't like them. I think the thing that should be remembered, it's a tool in the election, just like any other media thing that's put out, whether it's brochures or that. So it's something that has been here for many years and probably will for years to come. The idea of these new regulations, not new, but just tightening them up a little bit, tends to make it more palatable for everyone. You can be a little more clear on what you can and can't do. And because at one time there really was no regulations, you just put them up any old place. And that really makes it a lot easier for a municipality because they don't have to do anything. But on the flip side, it's pretty ugly looking around the municipality. So it has to be done with some type of guidelines that keep it in place. Overall, with a few tweaks here and there, I think the report's very good. you'll always have issues with people stretching the rules a little bit here and there because they think they can, they'll try and do it. So basically, you have to have the ability to put in some penalties that will maybe slap their hand a little bit. But the other side, if you have somebody that's coming out for the first time to run for an election, that $300 or $500 charge up front is just another expense to make somebody decide that they really don't want to do it. So it's can be a touchy thing on some areas, because if you start looking what it costs to run for an election, it can get very expensive. So that's just another charge on what the people have to do. So the charge has got to be enough that makes them aware that it's there, but it must be at a point where it's not a hindrance to running. So those are type of things that you have to sort of juggle as you're going forward. So overall, I think it's an excellent report, and thank Roger for Rob for doing such a great job on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman. Anybody else? So I need a motion to receive the report from Rob, please. Deputy Mayor Meloche and Councillor Bjorkman, all in favor? Thank you. Great report, Rob.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The next item in the agenda is 8.11, Legal and Legislative Services Report 2020-12, Cemetery Bylaw Amendments. That said report be received, that Bylaw 1812 be read a first and second time and be provisionally adopted, and that Bylaw 1812 be brought back for a third reading upon approval by the Bereavement Authority of Ontario. And finally, that current Bylaw 1186 be repealed upon 1812 coming into full force and effect.
Need a mover on this report, please? Councillor Bowman and Councillor Guerin. Any questions? All in favor? Thank you. It's carried.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I noticed at the outset of the meeting that our Youth Council member Hoffman was here, but I don't believe she's here now. Okay. Item 10, any updates from County Council?
Did you want to speak, Deputy Mayor Meloche, on that proposed catalog that the county is coming out with? I mentioned it to Nelson. Maybe I can speak on it a little bit if you want, Deputy Mayor. The county is coming out with this, what they call, what was the name of it, Deputy Mayor? It was a county catalog, was it? To show all their activities, places to go, and they wanted each municipality could get in at no charge. So it would show our spots like our harbor, we could put in there, a lot of our sports facilities, just to enhance our area here and put it on the county map. So, which I thought was, it's a good idea, and they're just coming out with that, isn't it, Deputy Mayor? They're just, yeah. So I just wanted to share that with council. So that's it for me. Have you got anything, Deputy Mayor?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Item 11 is correspondence. Correspondence to be received. That the items listed in 11.1 be received and where indicated to further share such information with the community.
Have a mover, please, on this. Deputy Mayor Meloche and Councillor Bjorkman. All in favor of the correspondence here? It's carried.
Item 12, committee meeting minutes. That the minutes listed in agenda item 12 be received and adopted as circulated.
Mover, please. Councillor Bowman, and a seconder, please. Need a seconder. Councillor Van den Dolen. Any questions? All in favor? Carried.
Item 13, Mr. Mayor, under financial, 13.1, the May 2020 bank payments report. That said report be ratified as submitted.
Mover, please, on the Deputy Mayor Malash. And Councillor, need a seconder here, Councillor Bjorkman. All in favor of the report? Did you have a question, Councillor Guerin? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I do. I don't know if there's anyone from administration to speak on it. Just a couple checks that popped up I saw that got my attention. Check number 51423 Essex Free Press for nearly $9,500. Just wondering what that was. And 51438, which was to Robert Swayze, Integrity Commissioner, $5,500. I pretty much know what that one is, but I'm wondering if that covers a quarter or does it cover like a month? I'm just wondering what that amount goes to.
Who can answer that? Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the only item I can answer is the Integrity Commissioner one. Mr. Swayze does usually bill out on a quarterly basis.
So that one's answered, Councillor Guerin, but the other one, can anybody answer the one on the Free Press? Go ahead, Chris.
I can't give them specifics, but I was just going to note that I will provide all of council the breakdown of what that's for.
Okay, thank you. Is that good, Councillor Guerin? Good, okay. Anybody else? All in favor? Carried.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, item 14, as added to new business to the adoption agenda this evening, is an item from Councillor Bondi that the town of Essex requests the Windsor-Essex County Health Unit to provide the breakdown of positive COVID-19 cases in our municipality and the region based on classification.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just, I believe as a councillor, we need to insist that the health unit provide raw data, not just the graphs that they're showing us. I've looked at some other health units and they provide a lot more granular data. So if we get the raw data, then we can make better decisions. You know, are we going to open our arenas? When can we, you know, look at the beach? Like, and I know all those things are coming, but the health unit, what they're currently providing is inadequate. And I think that they could be a little bit more transparent since we're still in stage 3 down here. Like, this is important to our residents to make decisions. This is important to our businesses to make decisions. So I'm really concerned with the lack of information from the health unit. We're the decision makers here. We need to get this information as we've been labeled a hotspot. So, you know, and it would be nice to have it, all the regions have it. And I believe, Mr. Mayor, you've pushed for it as well. So I just want to help support that. So if we want to move out of our declared emergency, we need these tools to make these decisions. I believe that, you know, the health unit, you know, a whole bunch of cases just came in Windsor. Where did the cases come from? Like, what was the cause of the cases? And was it community? Was it travel? And why? So I think the more data we have right now, the better. So I know that the health unit is increasing their staffing levels. So why can't they put more money into providing us with better data? And I did provide a couple of counselors today some different examples of what other health units are doing. They actually have like a live map where you can click on the neighborhood. So we're a big municipality. So if there's 4 cases in Southern Oaks, part of our municipality, and no cases in Western Oaks of our municipality, then that's important for us to know. So if council would support sending a letter to the health unit, then I believe all of our regions here could benefit from just more data. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I need a seconder on that, please. Councillor Bjorkman. Go ahead, Councillor Bjorkman. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I agree that the breakdown is important for us. I was going to say this in my councillor notes, but on Thursday, we're 4 weeks from entering stage 2. And the government is saying that they won't advance anybody until there's 4 weeks of data. So the rest of the county, except for Kingsville and Leamington, on Thursday is at 4 weeks. So how do we have that breakdown? What's the bar we're looking to hit for our communities in order to say we're ready to go to stage 3? We've got businesses, we've got places that haven't opened at all yet. There's others that are partially working, but there's others that are waiting to open their doors for the first time. And we're waiting on, we don't know where the bar is. And we know that we're behind as a region because of certain hotspots. So we need the data that shows Essex is not considered that hotspot, or that, you know, it's not community spread in Amherstburg or other areas. Do you have different health units that actually provide that information to the municipalities in that health units area? So that's the kind of thing that we need to have, so that we know where the bar is and how we can work towards getting there and get our businesses back to work. So I agree 100% with asking for more data, more specific data to the areas of this health unit. So I'm happy to go along with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Vandendolen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Snively. Yes, through you, I agree with the previous two councillors. We do need this information. I'd like to see it too, but I guarantee you, we will not get it in a million years. This current iteration of the health unit, for whatever reason, has decided it does not cooperate with other agencies and other political entities in the region. And it's just ask around the healthcare sector, and anybody who's connected well in the local healthcare sector will tell you the same thing. I don't know why it is, don't care. But there are people on this group here tonight who, having been confronted with similar lack of cooperation from the OPP, are ready to do all sorts of drastic things to that force because of that lack of cooperation. Well, maybe we should consider that with the health unit too. Can we defund them? Can we join maybe Chatham Kent's health group? If they're not helping us at all, and they're not of aid to us, I think that they're contributing to the public cynicism about this crisis, because there's such a terrible lack of transparency, and the figures and facts are so obviously being manipulated to produce a desired outcome in the public. You know, people are really cynical about this, and I don't blame them. And we deserve these numbers and these figures.
Thank you, Councillor. If I could just say, I was in the meeting today, the update on the coronavirus today, and what I got was, I forget the number. I think it was 17, if I believe it was today, somewhere in the teens. But the only thing that what they broke down, I think there was one travel. I think there was 7 or 8, almost half of migrant workers. Well, I shouldn't say the ag workers, and the rest were out in the public. But they did not state where it is in the public. And I agree. I agree that we should know. We should know, like, we should know what we have in Essex, and we should know what we have in Harold. But I know over the weekend, on Saturday, I think it was, there was 47 cases, and 41 of them was ag workers. And we got to understand one thing here. I shot myself in the foot today when I spoke, and it's just not the ag workers in the greenhouse operation. It's people that live outside of it are coming in, and they're getting the virus in the operation. So I don't know. It's puzzling, and I agree. Like, we should know the numbers and where they are. You know, where they are, because phase 3, we're not going to go into phase 3 anytime soon. I can tell you that right now. Not with these numbers. Not the way these numbers are going up. I hate to say it, but phase 3, I think, is down the road a little bit yet. So anyways, I'll leave it at that. If there's any other question, Councillor Guerin, go ahead.
You, Mr. Mayor, just on the numbers going up, we are wearing face masks, aren't we? That's all I want to say.
If I can just, I'll reply to that, Councillor Guerin. I was a witness yesterday at a shopping center, and I'm not going to say what town it was in, but there was a lot of migrant workers at this shopping center outside the door, half of them had masks on, half didn't. But the ones that went in the store had masks on, but they're standing at the door entrance without masks. So I'm concerned, and I had that message today to the health unit. So I think enforcement is very, very important, very critical here, very critical. If we're going to get on top of this virus, it's got to be enforced. Some of these rules got to be enforced. So anybody else from council? Okay, thank you. And I guess I need a.
So we have, through you, Mr. Mayor, we have a motion.
Yeah, we have.
Councillor Bondi and,
Yeah.
and Councillor Bureau.
Yeah, we had a motion. All in favor of the motion?
Oh, Mr. Mayor, may I please add that we send it to the other municipalities? Can we send it to the other municipalities? Is everybody okay with that? Councillor Bjork?
Yeah. Yep, good.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
All in favor of the change here? Okay, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, item 15.1.2, as added to the agenda this evening, is a notice of motion for presentment only. It would come back to the August 4th regular council meeting. As presented by Deputy Mayor Meloche, that council requests the Town of Essex Planning Department to include as part of their site plan control procedures, notification to property owners abutting a new subdivision of potential for water pooling if the existing property owners lack rear yard drainage. And furthermore, that these neighbors are notified with direct mail outs so that the existing properties have full comprehension of potential outcomes, i.e. water pooling of their own watershed at side yard or backyard. And furthermore, that the Town of Essex will act in the residents' best interests with aiding conversation between the new subdivision builder and the existing neighborhood and coming to a solution with regard to rear yard drainage. For presentment only again, and we'll return to the August 4th meeting.
Good. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, for that.
Item 16, reports and announcements from council members.
Councillor Bowman, you're first.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Just a comment, we've had a large number of reports this evening and very lengthy ones prepared by various members of our staff. And I just want to say thank you to each one of them for the work that's gone in, not just them, but their staff involved. These are the type of things that we're getting now with the quality of people we have. So it's really a pleasure to see these coming forward and the fine workmanship that's going into them. So big thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I just want to thank council again. It was a great meeting and thank administration. And when that letter for the municipalities is all set, can you please send it to council too? Thank you.
Councillor Van Nolan, anything?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Most people don't follow Twitter, so I just want to point out to the few viewers we have that there was some good news sent by CWATS today about Town of Essex. CWATS is the silly bureaucratic name we give to bike paths. And anyway, if you've noticed that Arner, 4.2 kilometers of the Arner has been semi-resurfaced. Well, CWATS announced today that they are adding bike lanes when they repave that. It didn't give a timeline when that's happening, but I just think it's great. That means that about a third of the Arner through the Town of Essex will have bike lanes. So that, from what I understand, every time they repave, they automatically add the bike lanes, and that's going to be fabulous when it's done. But this is a good start.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Who was next? Councillor Bjorkman, did you have anything?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to go back. I wanted to comment on something earlier, but so I'll comment on it now. We received in our reports there the budget, the preparations that are happening right now for our 2021 and then our 22 to 25. It's tremendous. We're getting this heads up now it's an opportunity for all of us to review what it is we're looking for and to talk with our constituents, see what we need. There's a great timeline in there. We're going to try to be done, for January. Our final meetings and deliberations in December and January. So just putting all of that together, having that extended forecast, looking at it, there was a lot of good work put together there, and I wanted to mention at that time. So it's a good time for all of us to do our homework. Again, speak to our constituents, see what we need in our areas, and bring that to the table. So thanks to Jeff and his staff for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bjorkman. Councillor Guerin, you're next. You have anything?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I wanted to just let everyone know that although we're not hosting any closed street events of any sort right now, still I'd like to call on everyone to continue supporting our local businesses and restaurants if they could, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Malash, did you have anything?
Nothing tonight. I'm going to pass. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Item 17, Mr. Mayor, bylaws. 17.1.1, 1930 to confirm the proceedings from the July 6th meeting.
Over, please. Councillor Bowman and Deputy Mayor Malash. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you.
Bylaw 1932 being a bylaw to authorize the execution of an agreement between the town of Essex and the city of Windsor, being a service agreement, basic provisions, children's services, pathway to potential, for 3 readings this evening.
Mover, please. Councillor Guerin and Councillor Bjorkman. All in favor of that one? Carried. Thank you.
And bylaw 1933 for 2 readings this evening to confirm the proceedings of this July 20th regular council meeting.
Mover, please. Councillor Vandendolen and Councillor Bowman. All in favor? And adjournments in order. Have a mover, please. Deputy Mayor Malash and Councillor Guerin. All in favor? Have a good night, Council. Thank you very much, and thank you to administration.